Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid and the next installment in Spring Forward. And today we are going to look back at the tight ends. Entering this spring, one of the points of concern about the offense was replacing the production of second team All Big Ten tight end Lance Mason. And I know some of you are saying right now, what production? He had 30 catches, less than 400 yards, only 4 touchdowns. Well, for tight end U, that Wisconsin is called sometimes, that's actually a pretty good season. And if you look at what I'm showing you right now, the career stats of Jake Ferguson, who has been one of the more productive Wisconsin tight ends and was able to parlay that into a solid NFL career so far, that's a good Wisconsin tight end. And in an offense that didn't do much else, and he was about the only reliable weapon we had, to even get that is an accomplishment. But that's enough talking about the sad 2025 season. What does that mean for 2026? Who's going to replace that production? Do we have enough receiving ability in the tight end room? And can the tight end room help the offense become more versatile? And I think as we saw the offense progress through this spring, through the limited scope and the vision, or what we've been able to see of the tight ends, I think instead of scrambling to find answers, I think the Badgers may have found one of the most flexible position groups on the team, because this tight end room, I don't think is going to be built on hierarchy. It's not going to be a 1 through however many. We're going to talk about 4 tight ends today. 1 through 4 tight end depth chart. It is going to be, we have our roles and how we're going to mix those role players into the offense to create more schematic flexibility, better matchup options, and just the ability to give different looks and run various ways, more ways to run the same plays. That's what the tight ends can do to help this offense going forward. So why is the tight end so important to the Jeff Grimes NFL style offense? Well, it starts with the wide zone blocking scheme and the importance of having those big bodies on the edges, because, simply put, it creates more gaps that the defensive front has to account for and has to fill in order to slow down the wide zone blocking scheme. And when you see how the scheme builds up, where we work everything wide and we try to cut and hit it up the middle by extending the edge of the box wider and wider, you are taking defenders out of the middle of the box, which is where they're necessary. And if you don't do so, you are allowing the offense to collapse the edge and just take it to the outside. So in the running game, it's really important. In the passing game, what you need is those intermediate and short threats that are going to hold the defensive structure to allow the vertical aspect of the passing game to open up. And the only way that you can do that is by having reliable targets who can find either the soft spots in the coverage, in your hook to curl, your flats up the seams, etc., or who can create the high-low reads in some of these more spacing concepts that are going to allow us to take better shots downfield, because we're occupying the eyes of the defenders. And then when you look into the perhaps more focus on progression reads, you need players who can get open, again, in those intermediate to short options, to either be that first read in the progression or to be that last read in the progression. and have that reliability. By doing that, we can manipulate coverage, we can manipulate defensive personnel, and it can help the offense overall. Having tight ends who are of value to the offense beyond the passing game and in the running game can take the offense to the next level. And what we are looking for and why versatility in the tight end room matters is we can use different player types but not sacrifice blocking, athleticism, receiving ability. You can always have the right guys in the right spot. And I think, in my humble opinion, the tight end room is in position to be that type of versatile room that could really help this offense take the next step. All right, so let's get into the players who are going to make up this flexible position group. And we're going to focus on the four that we heard the most of this spring and talk about how this offense is going to be built around them. And the four players we're going to talk about are Jacob Harris, Emmett Bork, Grant Steck, and Ryan Schwendeman. I'm going to start with Jacob Harris, who, as spring went on, became one of my personal favorite players because it just always seemed like he was in position to either make a tough catch or was always there to catch the quarterback's eye at the end of a progression in an off-platform type of situation and was able to come down with a tough catch. And the Bowling Green transfer, despite being 6'6", 270, even a little bit big for a tight end, showed the ability to be moved around. And we saw him as an inline tight end, detached in the slot, and even in situations where it looked like he was going to be used as a big boundary X-type receiver. So again, that having a tight end who can play in these different spots in most likely a 12 personnel situation, now you're really forcing defenses to make a choice. Do we match up with athletic ability, or do we match up with size and strength? That can be difficult. And I think Jacob Harris has that rare combination of size, movement ability. I don't think he's the fastest tight end in the world, but he gets to where he's going and he gets open efficiently. And he has such a great catch radius. He is a power forward, and he's going to get any rebound that you get in his general vicinity. And by doing so, I see him pretty clearly as your every down tight end. I hesitate to say tight end one, but he's the tight end that I don't want to leave the field. Because again, he has the size and the strength to be what we need in the running game, and he has the flexibility in the passing game that we can do so much with him that we don't need to take him off the field. He can just make a home at that Y spot, and the offense can be built around him. And that's huge, especially because, like I've been saying, he's building a rapport with the quarterbacks where they know when the shit hits the fan, where's Jacob? Let's get 89 the ball. Because he's going to come down with it. Now, hopefully that doesn't lead to reckless decision-making by the quarterbacks. But some of these catches that we saw in the spring, I like our chances if the ball goes in Jacob Harris's direction. All right, so next let's talk about one of the biggest rising stars that we saw come out of spring, and I use star in a loose term, and that's Emmett Bork, a late addition to his recruiting class. We heard his name last spring. He was able to get some playing time during the fall, and he entered spring as a young developmental piece, and maybe has exited spring as potentially the number two receiving tight end option. He's got natural hands. He tracks the ball well. For his size, he has some quickness and explosiveness, in his route running to get open. He still has some work to do about maybe turning some of his enthusiasm towards blocking into technique. But in an offense that is going to use multiple tight ends, I think he has a real shot of being that solid number two receiving tight end, which is going to allow him to grow into his blocking abilities, where going into maybe the 2027 season, he could be your number one tight end, your every down type guy going forward. But I really like the path that he's on. There comes a time with some of these young guys that you teach them enough to be productive and useful now, and then you set the rest of his skills as long-term goals. And I think that's what they're doing. He is going to be put in a lot of situations to catch passes. And if he could be a reliable target in, as I've been saying, the hook to curl the seam type areas, especially off of play action, he is going to get on the field a lot and could be a real asset to this offense as a solid number two option that we really haven't had from the tight end position. We usually have one tight end, and then everyone else is kind of blockers. But I think we got a solid number two pass catching tight end right here, and they're going to use that versatility to create matchup problems in 11 or 12 personnel situations. Solid kid. I think he's going to get a lot of reps. We're going to see how his blocking develops as we go through the fall, because he could potentially push even more into every down territory if he can become a better blocker, if I could talk clearly. Really like what we saw from Emmett Bork this spring. Next up, one of the, I don't want to call Grant Steck a question mark, because I think we know the type of player that we have from him. Big, strong guy, solid blocker, an up the seam kind of tight end, a vertical tight end, maybe not the smoothest hips on breaking out, but the type of guy who could be an underneath drag kind of receiver, can run up the seam, again being a big body, and made a couple difficult catches in the 2025 season. But we're still waiting for that breakthrough. And when he came to Madison, he started off being injured, and that kind of put him behind in terms of the depth chart. And so now this year, with how the room is being built around him, he doesn't have the matchup profile that maybe Jacob Harris does, or the ceiling that Emmett Bork has in the passing game. But if he can be a balanced tight end who maybe leans a little bit more into blocking, he could be your number two every down type tight end. And that means that he's waiting to get his reps when Jacob Harris comes off the field. And if I'm setting our tight end depth chart, he ain't coming off the field very often. So in his natural position, he might not get a ton of reps, which is where he's got to lean in on his blocking. Because obviously the easiest way to get to the heart of an offensive / tight end minded offensive coordinator is showing you your ability to block. And I think he's a better blocker than Emmett Bork, obviously based on his seniority. But I also just think technique-wise, he is much more controlled, and he shows much more much more of a fundamental base than Bork does, which is to be expected. So if Grant continues to progress as a blocker and becomes a solid overall blocker, maybe he becomes the number one blocking tight end. But he has flexibility. He's a solid all-around tight end. But if we look at his individual skill sets, parts of his skill set, is he a better receiving tight end, overall tight end than Jacob Harris? Is he a better receiving tight end than Emmett Bork? Is he a better blocking tight end than Ryan Schwendeman, which we're going to talk about here in a second? Maybe the answer is no. But he's just got to keep pushing because he's got all the skill in the world. And I think he could be a piece of this offense. I think he would have been the number one tight end, looking at to be the number one tight end if Jacob Harris didn't transfer in. Maybe that's why we brought him in. You never know. So, Grant Stack, flexible all-around option, but we're still waiting for that breakthrough that we were hoping for. And I don't know if the options are going to come this season, but in an offense that's going to use multiple tight ends, there's 4 tight ends who got significant reps last year. He was one of them. There is going to be a role, but is it going to be the type of role that we expected when he came in? That is yet to be seen. All right, and then the last tight end we're going to talk about, just brought him up, is the transfer coming in from Southern Illinois, and that's Ryan Schwendeman. He is a physical, willing blocker, and in an offense that, as we talked about at the beginning, sets an emphasis on having blockers who can get out in space and set those edges, it is highly important. So for him to find his way into a serviceable role in this offense, he is going to have to be that number one blocking option. Because he's a little bit smaller than our other tight ends, 6'5", 240-ish, but in an offense that relies a lot on tight ends to run split flow, to run GH lead, to be that H-back type, fullback tight end hybrid, I think Schwendeman has the body type, and it sounds like with the way he was being used this spring, the coaches have that similar idea of where he's going to fit. And because maybe he can become a better blocker than an Emmett Bork type, he can find his way into those situations where that second tight end needs to be more of a blocker. And that's going to be important. Be a pseudo fullback. And I know we have a fullback technically in the roster in Tyler Jansey, and that's awesome. It doesn't hurt to have both. I mean, look back to the old Washington Redskins offense back in the day. You can use a fullback and a lead blocking tight end efficiently in this pro style type of offense. So if he continues to work and build on his physicality and has enough asset in the passing game, whether it be off a split flow into the flat, whether it be on tight end delays coming off play action, he's going to have a chance to have a role in this offense. And with that, we have 4 tight ends who each have their own individual skill sets, and yet they all mix. They all have maybe their key skill set, there's key attributes, but there's overlap with the other tight ends. And that allows us to have flexibility within the offense where it is not so obvious when we bring Emmett Bork in what he's going to do. As long as you pair these tight ends correctly, you're going to have a well-balanced offense that has more capability in the passing game than what is previously expected without sacrificing the potential to help the run game. That's what a solid tight end room can do in this type of offense. And it's what's going to be needed for this offense to take the next step forward in the 2026 season. And with that, I think we're going to be a little bit shorter today, but that's fine. We're going to call it a day. I am pleasantly surprised with where we are with the tight ends. I think we have gone from a potential weakness to a low-key strength in the offense. Just got to see how it goes in fall camp. Next up, we are going to talk about the wide receivers, a room that was completely overhauled in this offseason. And how does that complete overhaul, on top of adding all these new quarterbacks, change what our passing game is going to look like in the 2026 season? We're going to have a little bit more speculation into scheme when we start talking about the receivers. We're still going to do a separate breakdown of what changes have been added to the offense this season, but we're going to get a first glimpse of at least the direction that the passing game is going to go when we take a look at the wide receivers. But that will be next time. Thank you as always for watching and for listening, and we'll see you then.